Waiver Wire Winners, these are players rostered in under 50% of sleeper leagues to consider adding for Week 14. The rookie James Cook was the lead back in Buffalo this past week. He saw season highs in snap percentage with 43, receptions with 6, touches with 20, and fantasy points with 16.5. The Buffalo Bills invested a second-round pick in this guy. Jahan Dotson does hit a bye week, but he had his highest snap percentage since returning from injury. He caught 5 of his 9 targets. He scored his 5th touchdown of the season. He was a first-round investment by the Commanders. He scored over 17 fantasy points his first 2 weeks. The Houston offense is rough, but Nico Collins has seen 10, 7, 9, and 10 targets the last 4 games, in which he scored 2 touchdowns in that span. Greg Dulcich had his best fantasy week of the season with 14.5 points. He had 8 targets, 85 yards, 4th game over 11 fantasy points in 7 appearances, and he could get a bump if Sutton is out. Corey Davis played 81% of the snaps. He had 10 targets from Mike White, who's been playing well. His 4th game over 13 fantasy points and 8 full appearances. Demarcus Robinson is operating as the wide receiver 1 for the Ravens, 3rd time in his last 5 appearances with 8+ targets. DJ Chark's role can change once Jameson Williams is more healthy, but he's had 11 targets across his last 2 games. He scored in Week 12, 98 receiving yards in Week 13. 2nd time in 5 full appearances, he scored over 14 fantasy points. Robert Woods has seen 7, 6, and 5 targets the last couple of games. Treylon Burks is going to have to work through concussion protocol, and they play the Jaguars. That is a top 10 matchup for wide receivers in fantasy. Mac Hollins has a boosted role with Waller and Renfro on the IR. 2 out of 3 of his last games, he's seen 9 targets. Mike White, the last 2 weeks, has been the quarterback 6 overall, averaging 22.13 fantasy points. His playoff schedule, he faces Detroit, who is 1st, Jacksonville, who is 8th, and Seattle, who is 13th overall in fantasy points per game allowed to quarterbacks. The Kansas City Chiefs defense and special teams had a rough week versus the Bengals, but they have the Broncos, the Texans, the Seahawks, and Broncos the next couple of weeks. A lot of people will talk about the Seahawks backfield. You just have to pay attention to the news because we're not sure if Kenneth Walker will play. Is DJ Dallas even healthy? Is Travis Homer back? Tony Jones was rotating in. Just have to pay attention to news here. And if you want to pause this one to read it, here are 3 additional guys to think about maybe stashing for the fantasy playoffs: Romeo Doubs, Alec Pierce, and Isaiah McKenzie. You can also check your waiver wire for guys like Zonovan Knight, Cam Akers, Darius Slayton. They just didn't fit the criteria for the video.